Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's RISE session with Gap Inc. I'm Beth McNulty. I work on the internship program team, which is part of our Greater Retail Academy organization. And I work with Ben Moline, whose name you might see on the screen. And welcome to life with COVID and a baby. But today we're really excited to share with you our macro trends in retail presentation created by and presented by Brianna, who I'll let introduce herself and share a bit more about her experience, but excited to have you. And for the chat functionality, please be sure that you're sending to panelists and all attendees. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please drop them in the Q&A widget, and we'll either answer them live later at the end, or if we aren't able to get to your question, we're going to jot them down and I'll try to connect with you on LinkedIn to get you that answer later on. All right, and with that, Brianna, take it away.
Awesome, thank you, Bev. Hi, everybody. We're so lucky to have Beth's daughter, Claire, make a cameo. She's so sweet. I'm really thankful to be with you all today. As I understand it, a lot of you are rising seniors going into your last year of college. I know some of you are earning your MBA. It's a lot going on in the world right now. So I am thankful we can all be together and get into some exciting stuff about what's happening in the retail industry. You'll hear throughout my presentation, I am aware and recognize all of the change and disruption and challenge out there. And I'm also an optimist, and I'm really excited and bullish around what's kind of industry. So I thought a lot about today, what would be helpful for you all, considering where you are. I was thinking about my senior year of college 20 years ago. And I'm definitely going to talk to, tech and I'll show you some shiny objects and some things that I think are pretty cool. But I'll also take some time to tell you a little bit about my career, decisions I made, and some of the frameworks that I've used that have helped me think differently in the industry because there have been so many changes. As we go along, feel free to do Q&A. I think Beth will let me know as they're coming. There's a little bit of interactive. I'm going to ask you guys a few questions just to get you thinking. So feel free to chat. I can see it. And we'll try and make this as interactive as possible considering everything. So again, thanks. We'll get started. Cool. So as I mentioned, I was a senior 20 years ago. I was actually, and I hope this gives you all hope, I was an American literature major. So when I was where you are, I was literally theses on Chaucer and Ralph Waldo Emerson. So you guys are much further ahead than I was at that stage. After college, I moved to Washington, D.C. So one of the things I was actually talking to my family about this recently, a little bit of my times, it's going to be really interesting, your times and the decisions, but I didn't have any fear or challenges for moving around the country and frankly the globe. So I grew up in California. I moved to Washington, D.C. When I first started working on Capitol Hill, a young man from South Carolina came up to me and said, my dad told me that God picked up the East Coast and all the nuts rolled west. So that was my introduction to Washington, coming from California. But I had an amazing time. I ended up working for Walmart in Washington on global trade and global supply chain issues. So I got a really good 360 view of how the retail industry works and how global policies impact the retail industry. I had a chance to meet Michelle Obama. She's tall and so personable. She really lets you in person, but that's no surprise to all of you. After Washington, I decided to go back to business school. I know some of you are earning your MBAs right now. I then went to management consulting in New York. So I think this was my third time moving, or second or third time moving across the country. And I worked in the retail sector, consumer sector, really connecting retailer strategies to their operating models and how the organizations were set up to adapt to digital issues. And this is in 2010, right, as e-commerce is coming in. So there was a lot of conversation around whether or not to do it, if you can even imagine, and if to do it, how to do it. Then about almost 5 years ago, I came to Gap Inc. I've had a few roles in Gap Inc. I started in our global supply chain function, and then I got the amazing opportunity to build our innovation center. And so I worked on digital product and material roadmaps as part of our digital innovation center. And then recently in the last year, I came internal to Banana Republic, and I'm the head of our product strategy and operations team now. And I really focus on thinking about how digital enables us to be connected to our customer, delivering the right product in an experience that is meaningful and it meets our customers' expectations. Couple little personal things I'm interested in, and you guys are more than welcome to ask questions, but I'm an investor and I'm on the advisory board to a venture capital firm called Alante Capital. Eileen Fisher is the anchor advisor investor, and we're focused on investing in sustainable materials, products, and digital in the apparel supply chain. A real focus on sustainability. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that. I'm also studying right now at Stanford Medical School the neuropassion. I know that sounds really fancy, but it's about learning how to be with discomfort for yourself and other people. And it's a big part of my leadership development. So again, happy to answer any questions about that as we go along. I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about digital history then and now. So a lot of things I do with myself and with my team is I like to span out and increase my aperture in terms of how I'm thinking about a problem. Often, most of us, right, we think in the moment with the particular problem that we're trying to solve. And from my experience, the patterns of humanity are much more predictable. And when we look to the past, we can better the future. So I'll ask you guys to think a little bit here and ask you some questions. So, give me a yes or no if in the chat you've heard of the technology adoption curve. I'm just curious of how many of you have heard of this curve before. Yes or no? And I would be surprised if a lot of you had, but that you haven't. Cool, some of you have, no, yes. Cool. So, I hadn't heard of it, I think until like 5 or 10 years ago. But what this is talking about is really human behavior and human adoption of technology. And I think one of the biggest things that we all, myself, can get distracted by or can in terms of technology is this shiny object syndrome is what I call it, or the fact that technology exists is what's most important. And obviously when it comes to medicine or other technologies, in some ways that is the case. But when it comes to digital technology, a lot of the times we produce technology in search of a problem. I'm very much of the fundamental, the practice that we look for the problem that we're trying to solve and then look for the technology solution. But this technology adoption curve is really about need, access, and affordability. And the fact that the technology exists doesn't mean it's going to be adopted. So you can see on the left-hand side, really innovators, those are the people that create new ideas, whether it's to process more. And this curve also applies to organizations, right? So you might think of Apple as an organization that's more of an innovator. That's part of their mission statement. Early adopters, they're the ones that take those ideas and they start applying them in real world practice. The early majority, they work with new ideas that seem to already be proven. So this early majority is a really important segment, one that I'm always looking at and watching, because mostly people in the early majority have to see it work and see the benefits of it working. They're not necessarily using a vision into the future to see how it could work. So they're really looking for proof points. The late majority, they're going to apply new ideas only when it's established routine. They're not necessarily people that are going to break a new habit to incorporate technology, but if it's there and it's easy and replaceable, whether that's need, access, or affordability, then they will adopt. And then late majority, laggards, only when forced. So I'm sure maybe you guys aren't old enough yet, but I can think of my parents and how long it took my mom to get an iPhone. I'd say she was a laggard in that case. Gartner's hype cycle. So that's this red line that's kind of laid upon the graph, and I've experienced this personally working in innovation. The chasm, that's a man by the name of Jeffrey Moore who invented that, and he's basically just talking about this gap from early adopters to early majority. So I've experienced this particularly in retail, right? Because historically retail has been about big ideas. We need to get really big ideas that have the biggest impact. Well, when technology comes along, it's not a big idea at first. So a lot of the time you're working in the innovator and the early adopter phase, people that are looking for early majority or late majority business ideas, you'll hear like, oh, that's a small idea. It's not a big enough idea. And the chasm really becomes into play. So I spend a lot of my time thinking about the psychology of the chasm, not only externally with our customers, but internally with stakeholders that I'm trying to convince of a business case, or realistically convincing that we should prototype and test to see what it could be. So I'll ask you guys for some little like quiz here in the chats. Take a guess. How many people in the United States do you think, what percentage of people in the United States have access to electricity, power, and energy? Excuse me, globally. I'm sorry, globally. So take a guess. Oh, some lower, 65, 30, 10, 50, 40, 40. It's actually 85%. So it's a lot higher, 84%, a lot higher. So those that don't have access to it, right, they either can't afford it or they don't have access. Obviously there would be a need, but I just wanted to drive home the point that just because the technology exists doesn't mean that everybody has it. Okay, for Americans in the US, guess how many people own a car? What percentage of people own a car? $73, $85, $45, 70%, really close. So 80% of Americans own a car. So I'm somebody, I'm 40 years old and I've never owned a car in my life. I've lived in New York, Washington, LA, and San Francisco. The reason I bring up this is because I imagine the people, those of you that guessed on the lower end, perhaps you live in a city, perhaps you don't own a car yourself, perhaps you're really into, Uber, subway, public transportation. Another reason I use this kind of thinking and exercise is it helps us get out of our own heads and our own perception of the way we think that most Americans live their lives. So in 2010, guess what percentage of Americans, adults, US adults, were using internet in 2010? Take some guesses here. Hopefully you're not Googling any of this. 50%, 65%, 60%. Yeah, so 50%. So think about that. 10 years ago, think about how old you were. There were only 50% of US adults using the internet. In 2019, so last year, almost 10 years later, it was up to 90%. And that's just using the internet. I'm not even talking about buying things online. We'll get to that in a second. Mobile phone ownership. So how many people, what percentage of Americans do you believe own a mobile phone right now? Take some guesses. 90%, 85%, 90%, 90%. You guys are getting a lot better with your guesses. This is cool. It's 96% of Americans, but only 81% own smartphones. So think about the difference. Maybe some of you are asking what's the difference between a mobile phone and a smartphone. For those of us that had, Nokia flip phones and things like that, in 2008 with the invention of the iPhone and the smartphone and the internet in your pocket was a big deal. People like my mom, and up until a couple of years ago, hadn't transferred over into having the internet in their pocket. So we still have almost 20% of the US that aren't having a smartphone in their pocket. Just a quick fact for the men and the women in the audience, 84% of men have smartphones and 79% of women. So there's a 5% deficit between men and women in terms of smartphones. So you can see when you start looking at data and technology adoption, you can start to get a better understanding of where people are. And when I bring it all back to this change curve, I'm always thinking about, for example, in 2010, if I have 50% of the people on the internet, am I going to push those people to start buying things online? Or am I going to wait until I get to the 80, 90% and then really push out for people to buy online? So much of this job is human psychology and thinking about change and adoption. So one of the things, take a guess on, the last thing I'll ask you to guess on is how much of US retail sales, so considering that 90% of the people are now using the internet, how much of US retail sales do you think occurred online in 2019 before COVID happened? And then in April 2020 when COVID happened? So just think, maybe jot on a piece of paper. You don't have to chat it up, and don't worry, I'm gonna come back to this, but I want you to keep a placeholder in your mind, the question of how many people were buying things online before COVID, how many people are buying things online after COVID. All right. I have a little lag. There we go. So the other thing, like I said, I'm always scanning out to see what's going on a longer time frame. When COVID hit, I did a bunch of research on how pandemics and how, in economic challenging times have impacted technological innovation and evolution. So in 1918, 20, some of you have probably read about the Spanish flu. At the time, when you're in a time of pandemic, people want to spread information as much as possible. They actually were using pretty analog systems to do it. They used the Boy Scouts to market and products and educate public on how to stay safe during the flu. What happened after the flu is it completely democratized the telephone. So in 1876, right, almost 25 years before it happened, the phone was invented. But in 1890, like 20 years, 30 years before, 3 out of 1,000 people had a telephone or were using a telephone. After the Spanish flu in 1926, that jumped up to 1 in every 5 people that had a telephone and were using a telephone. The Great Depression, so 1929 to 1938, the story really here is the commercial radio. Before the radio and during the Great Depression, it was used for fireside chats to disseminate information about the country, the economic realities, what was going on. And P&G, Procter & Gamble, was one of the first companies to come on after this, prompted by this, to start doing advertisements on the radio. So if you think about it, no one was doing that at the time. It was this new form of communication, and now advertisers were going there. It sort of reminds me of what we're seeing with podcasts in the last 10 years. More recent times, right, 20 years ago, this was When I was your age, I forgot actually. It was September 11th. That's what was happening. That happened. You guys are having the pandemics. September 11th happened right before I went into my senior year of college. We had the dot-com crash, and what happened here is coming out of this was the invention of e-commerce. It was just 20 years ago. Big data, web experience, really commercializing the web. It also included IPOs of technology companies. So we saw growth of Amazon, eBay, also, companies like coupons.com that were really creating that commerce and online, or enabling that commerce in an online experience. The Great Recession. So I'm sure a lot of you remember this just 10 years ago. And what happened out of this is seed funding for startups. So seed funding is the stage when you just have a cool idea that you want to explore. That grew 50% in 2009 coming out of the Great Recession. So people were looking for new ideas and innovation. You had Amazon Web Services, so Amazon Cloud, this idea of big data happening. And then social media was invented after the Great Recession, and through it, like obviously the iPhone was invented. I was remiss not to say that. Instagram, Airbnb, Uber, those were all invented in the 2009, 2010, 2011 frame. So again, this is where some of my bullish optimism comes in, because it's an exciting time to be in retail and commerce. There's opportunities in these times. All right, so the new normal. One of the things I talk about briefly is coming into COVID. Where were the retailers and what was going on? Obviously, you've heard of the idea of a retail apocalypse. Brands had been required, to switch to e-commerce. And then there was a huge push in 2014, 15, 16 to go to omni-channel, being able to be online or in store. And now we've got this huge push to be channelless, right? We've got 50% of online transactions are happening on phone. That's a game changer. The customers that are buying on their mobile are 2 times more valuable in terms of their frequency and their average order purchase. Well, some people argue, and you can read, the media definitely plays up the idea of the retail apocalypse starting in 2010. You had a lot of brick and mortar stores closing. You had loss of retail jobs. But similarly to what I was just talking about with some of the challenging times and what came out of that, if you look at what's come out, you've got some really interesting digitally native brands. When you look at the long tail, that last 1% of retail sales in the industry, it's gone from something like around 20 or 30 brands up into the 400 or 500s just in the last 5 years. The ability to get online, produce and sell goods, the friction there has just completely gone away. You've got brands like Glossier, Native Deodorant. There's been over $50 billion investment from Silicon Valley into a lot of these digitally native brands. And then I think one of the things that's most important, it's a little detailed, but this idea that we can attribute customer behavior. And hopefully some have talked to you about customer acquisition costs. I mean, just the idea that I can know how much you spend at my store, how much time you spend there, frequently you come back, and if I spend marketing dollars on you, how you will respond is a really, really nascent way of working and concept. And digitally native brands really brought forth that way of thinking. What's exciting now is the bigger brands have evolved and adapted to that way of thinking, and to propel into the future using that. So I'm really optimistic about the future. Like I said, we're better able to match our products and services to customer preferences. We can see more now. We can understand more. We can see people, so we can respond in kind. So I asked you guys to think about the guess. How many people shopped online just in March, even before shelter in place, to April, even just 2 months later? So take a guess of how many percentage points you think increased in the chat from March to April. So how many more people percentage-wise shopped from March to April, May? See what you guys are saying. 45 increase, 20%, 30%. And I realize I asked the question a little bit weird because I'm asking what increase over it was before the total. So I'll show you guys the increase is technically 100% because we went from there we go. We went from 16% of people shopping online to almost 27% at the end of April. If you guys look back about that technology adoption curve that I was showing you, going from like 5%, right, early adopters, if that, in 2009, growing steadily, almost 1 point, right, if you look at that, into 2019, and then in 2 months' time to jump 10%. A couple of things that always shocked me about this number. One is only 16% of people shopped online, right? I exclusively shop online. I'm sure a lot of you do too. It's a reminder that you're not part of the majority in that. And then secondly, for what retailers are having to bear right now. Even Amazon wasn't ready. I mean, this has been Amazon's vision and strategy the whole time, but they did not have the infrastructure, and I'm sure some of you experienced that in April and May, nor were they ready for 10%. And any corporate planner, digital e-com planner, in 2018 or 19, if they would have been making 3 or 5 year plans for 27% e-commerce penetration, they would have been laughed out of the room. So nobody was ready. Nobody was ready for this. The challenge, you all know, is that this increase in consumer spending has not outpaced the loss of sales in the store. So it goes without saying that there's been a real challenge. Where we are seeing opportunities is that multi-channel approach to delivering our goods. We've seen and this is nationally, not just within Gap Inc., but we've seen 107%, so more than double increase in curbside pickup and BOPUS. These were nascent technologies, like in Banana Republic, we just launched BOPUS at the end of last year. Again, go back to the technology adoption curve. We knew it was something interesting, but we didn't know how interesting it was. We still have a lot of customers that love to come in and experience and touch and feel. But that's been obviously huge for all retailers. You've got 79% say they're using some form of contactless payment. It's really high for me. I was shocked to see that when you think about Apple Pay and things like that. 41% bought grocery for the first time. What we're seeing with the pandemic is that we remember at the end when we talked about laggards and laggards being forced to do something. Obviously, the pandemic has forced early adopters to adopt behavior that they wouldn't have had in this time frame. So we're seeing a lot of behavior here that we didn't expect and we weren't planning. But for me, I see that as an opportunity. One of the other big evolutions that's been going on that I wanted to make sure, for those of you that are really into data, I'm a data nerd, I love it, the cloud wars. I'm curious, yes or no, in the chats, have you guys heard about the cloud wars? Do you know what the cloud is? Yes or no? Yes, yes. Cool. Don't know much about it. Yes, yes. Yeah, and that's the thing with technology, it's so exciting right now because there's so many things, and you could get real, I could get real nerdy on this for a while because there's so much possibility here. These are the top 6 in revenue for this year so far. Cloud services. And really what cloud is, think about it with your phone. If you guys have the extra cloud service that you pay, you lose your phone, no big deal, you can back up. Companies didn't have that. A lot of companies and retailers specifically were housing their own servers and were housing all their data and information. What cloud has been able to do, and Gap Inc., we've publicly stated, we work with Microsoft Azure, and we're in the middle of moving to the cloud. What that enables is these centralized data pools. When you think about it, we're still working in a very analog fashion in terms of Excel, homegrown tools within organizations, having to translate between files, having to translate between systems. It's the amount of friction that exists within internal ways of working, looking at customer data, looking at sales data, and it tells us what's happening so we can predict the future better. So I am super excited about the power of the cloud going forward, and happy to answer any more questions. Just to make this real, like what I do, one of the things I'm really excited about, and this is really in my role as investing in sustainable companies in the supply chain, but Google Cloud last month announced a pilot with Stella McCartney in Europe to trace the material inputs of their supply chain. So there's so much transparency and visibility that this software can bring, and I'm excited about that. A little fun fact that in 2018, this was around a $40 billion industry, and in 2020, it's expected to triple almost to over $100. So it's a really exciting industry and growth going on. My other fun fact is data. If you think about how much data existed in the world, in 2007, there was like essentially 0 gigabytes, right? So not a lot of data. Not coincidentally, the iPhone was invented in 2008. In 2020, this year, we have 44 trillion gigabytes of data. And it's so you guys know, like, I don't always think about this. That means there's data and servers sitting out, in states like Arizona or Utah, these big, they're just storing our data. It's very dystopian, right? You could write a science fiction novel about it. And just to give you a sense, if I say gigabytes and you're like, what are you talking about? A small company with about 24 people would have about 2,000 gigabytes of data. So when you think about 44 trillion gigabytes of data, it's just incredible. So all of this cloud stuff, and I'm going to get into some of the technology things that I'm interested in right now, is enabling us to AI, right? It's enabling advanced analytics. It's enabling inventory management, all of that kind of stuff, operations, things like that. There we go. So this is just, I was just kind of listing all of the things that I'm watching and monitoring across retail right now, and I'm happy to answer any questions about this, but I think about it as technology in terms of how we create products. So remember, right now I'm in the vertical apparel business. We make all of our clothes, right? They're either Gap, Banana Republic, Athleta, Old Navy labeled. So creating, concepting, designing, actually making and producing those clothes, and then selling them. A lot of times we think about e-commerce. We've talked about that a lot so far. We've talked about marketing effectiveness a little bit, but I wanted just to spend a little bit of time on the create. There's some amazing technology going on right now that's allowing visual line planning. This is when you get to see the really cool 3D stuff, digital color, artwork design, consumer analytics testing. There's just so much here going on. There's we did a great pilot with a company called Maker Sites recently, which enables us to proto and concept and then test with customers and send emails to our customers to see if they like the product. A colleague of mine in the industry at IKEA, who I talk with regularly, computer generated imagery, CGI, is huge in this space. IKEA's catalog, if you see it online or if some of you or your parents get it in the mail, 30% of that catalog is CGI, meaning it hasn't been made, it doesn't exist. It's seeing what the demand is. Furniture is a little easier, right? We're not as rift when we have a 5-week wait time for a piece of furniture or a 6-week wait time for a piece of furniture. We're struggling a little bit with apparel, right? Because you see it, you want it now. But we're working through that and figuring that out. So, draping clothes digitally, being able to understand how a fabric's going to lay on a model, working with vendors to do critical fits back and forth digitally. There's some great technology going on there. And then again, we've talked about that, mobile apps, chatbots, conversion to IRL, neighborhood goods, if you're familiar with that. And there's some really cool stuff to be able to in-store measure how many people come into the store, how many people convert. There's some cool startups that are doing that at the mall level, seeing how many people are in the mall and how many people go into each store. We don't really have that online, conversion data in real life. And you have seen a lot of people going into that space. Obviously, how the pandemic impacts that. Personalization, localization, that's just the idea of, if you've been on the site recently and all you're looking at is dresses for weddings, then I'm going to send you an email that says, hey, we've got a sale for dresses for weddings, or here's 7 ways to style a dress for weddings. There's some really cool stuff going on here with actual geographic location. That's exciting. And the last one I'll mention, just because I think this is exciting, it's customers as employees. So there's this really cool intersection going on with social selling, Instagram influencers. There's a cool startup that just came out of Y Combinator, which is a famous accelerator here in Silicon Valley, called Zyper. And basically you can go and register with them with your Instagram account. Me as a company, I can go work with Zyper and I can pick 100 people that can, promote and influence the product and get paid a commission to do that without, going through all the influencer contracts and things like that. It's a kind of a micro way for you to earn money based on who you promote. So if you're really into that and you have a large following, go check out Zyper. The last thing I'll mention here is this idea of proto and testing concepts. It's something I'm really passionate about. I've been working on it a lot when I was running the Innovation Center, and I've brought that way of thinking into Banana Republic. The fashion apparel industry really just made things and then put them out to sell. All of us did that. We're taking tips from the tech industry of how do you prototype and test concepts to see if people really like them before you go into full production. So I promised you a couple shiny objects. I'll just show you what this stuff looks like so you can get a sense. So this is a cool company called Change of Paradigm. And if you can see here, this idea that I can make something, piecemeal it together, and then put it on a model, put it on my website is pretty cool. I'll show you one more time. This might not seem like much to you all, but this is really at the forefront for apparel, to be able to piecemeal and make things and bring it together and then put it on body. Fizzy Digital Experience is kind of a cool little term. This company called Fabricant that I really like, they merge physical and digital capabilities in a really interesting way to create interactive brand experiences. They also create purely digital fashion. So this is a real human being on a New York rooftop. This dress is entirely digital, and this was sold digitally to a private customer. So take a guess in the chat. I'll look and see what you guys say, how much that this dress sold for. Again, it does not exist in Ireland. It's completely digital. The person can only wear it online or on Instagram. So take a guess in the chats of how much this sold for. You guys are good. I'm Sarah Park. I'm just gonna give you a shout out. That's exactly, no. I'm sorry. One more zero, Sarah Park. It sold for $10,000. You guys you can Google it, check my work, $10,000. I know, sorry, Sarah. I thought you got it right on the nail. I was like, you guys are getting good. I know, right? Like, who's gonna spend $10,000? But as we start to see the online world come more and more of where we spend our time and energy. I mean, we think about Rent the Runway. What about, you know, rent the digital shirt? So again, this stuff I show you guys, it's real shiny because I'm going back to the adoption curve. And what happens a lot is I'll get a ton of emails from startups, friends and texts. This is so cool. This is so interesting. I'm like, yes. And I keep up on it, right? This is why I know these companies and what they're doing. But then I have to come back in business and think about the adoption curve and the fact that I still have, you know, almost 70% of people that aren't buying things online. Am I going to push them to buy a digital only, right? But how I think about things is, how are my innovators going to impact my early adopters? How might this be a beachhead for something that would show that we're at the cutting edge? So there's a lot of really cool strategy that comes into play here. This last one is a gaming company. It's called Drest, D-R-E-S-T. It's a game, it's a styling game. And I'll just show you guys a video. It's pretty cool, and they do weekly challenges and you can style things, and they're sponsored by companies. So I think a couple of weeks ago, Gucci sponsored a competition, and you go and play and then you win either money or promotions or things from the company. Just give you a little preview of what it looks like. So pretty cool, right? And if you guys haven't looked at that, I'm sure a lot of you play the games. I'm not a gamer, shocker. But if you look at the data and statistics, which I do a lot in terms of gaming and where that's going, you know, I think about back to the commercial radio, right? Where people were using radio just to communicate information. We've been using gaming to, you know, play and build community. I think the commercialization of gaming is going to be a really interesting frontier over the next 10, 20, 30 years. So the last quick thing, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I want to leave the time for questions. I've talked a lot about, you know, the technologies and what's coming. I spend the majority of my time thinking about, you know, strategy meeting humanity. As I was raised as a strategy management consultant, you know, as I was trained, so much of what we were taught was to go out and look at the market, look at our competitors, size the market, figure out what we're going to go after. It's completely switched, and COVID has even catapulted that, you know, times 20. You can't look to last year anymore to next year's going to look like. So we have to go out and be with customers and really understand psychologically what's going on and what people need. We did a session right when COVID started with my team on the 5 stages of grief. And we had a psychologist come in and we talked about what was going on at each stage. And then we really plotted and predicted where our customers would be against each of those stages, obviously, you know, circling among them all, to understand psychologically what they were going through, what they needed, what they were going to need in 6 months. And it's about understanding that there's going to be fear. So we need to make sure that our stores are safe. and really being able to help people and meet people. So given all of that, there are a couple of frameworks working that I use a lot. Some of you have probably heard of these, but they're newer to the retail industry and particularly the fashion and apparel industry. So the customer journey, and some of you I'm sure have heard this word. I make my team do this all the time. We defining what the customer journey actually is along discovery, browsing and selection, checkout, wear and aftercare, and what that feels like and looks like. And then we gather facts to, like a lot of the facts I've shared with you today, and what that customer is doing or thinking depending on that category or product. And then we identify the pain points and the friction, just like if we were a customer. And then that's how we're able to define the value proposition and how we might add value to that customer through not only product, but experience. And then step 5 is when I go out and I look for a technology that's going to help me deliver that value proposition. As you guys get out there and working and talking to people, you'll see most people intuitively start with step 5. They look at the technology and they think about how they can apply it. If you take away one thing from today, is imploring you to start with the customer, the psychology of the customer, the behavior and the pain point, and then find the technology to solve it. You're going to be in a much better position. So a really quick example, and I'll have you guys kind of workshop through this with me for our last couple of minutes here, is we did this with suiting. Now this was before COVID, so just go with me for a little bit. We were looking at our suiting business. So just take a minute for here. Pretend like you are looking for a suit for a special occasion, whether it's a work interview, a speech that you have to wear a suit, a wedding. And I just want you to think about, if you have a piece of paper, cool, just jot it down. You can think in your head, what's the first thing that you would do to learn about where you want to buy a suit? So just think about that for a second. What would you do as a customer if you wanted to learn about buying a suit? Cool. Google it. Natalie says, Samantha. Right, so that's kind of how I think about it, right? I think what's the first thing that someone's going to do, but then facts around it. Like, for example, when you, well, that's what we did, you guys. We looked at the Google search. Google search returns 1.6 billion results when you search how to buy a suit. And you can check my work right now. We can do that. We went and reviewed a bunch of Reddit posts. We found a bunch of people like, how should a suit fit? Where's a good place to buy a suit? How should it look? We read a lot of the GQ articles out there that were talking about how to find a suit, how to buy a suit. There's a ton. We were on Instagram looking. So we got really enmeshed in what that whole discovery period looked like. Talk about facts. We found that 64% of men, people identifying as men, don't own a suit, which is fascinating, right? So ultimately, and I'm moving a little quickly, but you can guess, right, when we figured out what was the pain point, when we'd gone through the whole exercise, the pain point was that there was an abundance of information. And for people who really didn't know, or I love the ask of parents or friends, right? We found that big time, like asking parents and friends. If people don't know, then perhaps we can offer a service there. And we can serve as a voice of helping you buy your first suit. So I won't go into too many details because some things have changed since COVID, but I went out and I have an NDA right now with a technology company that's helping us really solve that pain point and that friction point. So I wanted to show you guys how I think about problems and how I think about solving them. Then the last thing I'll show you is a design sprint. And again, some of you might have heard of this. It's a 5-day event, which in most retailers is a big thing to take. You take all the stakeholders that are involved from an end-to-end problem that you're trying to solve. You map out the customer journey. You figure out which points you're trying to solve. actually sketch, create prototypes. We did this for shapewear before we launched True Hues. I know you guys had Baja and Mel recently talking to you. I'm sure they brought some of this up. We went and looked at the whole shapewear market. We actually prototyped a website really quickly to show what that would look like in like the Banana Republic and feel. And then we brought in customers on that Friday. We started on Monday. On that Friday, and I sat in the room with them. I showed them the website, and I literally, I said, "Where would you go next? Is that interesting?" And we watched their behavior as they navigated the site, what they were interested, what they liked, and what they didn't like. And we were able to get so much insight as to what we wanted to go forward with and how we wanted to go forward with it. So with that, I talk a lot about startups, you guys. I just want to give a shout out for, being a retailer. I've lived in New York. I've lived in LA. I love being in San Francisco because of all of the interaction with startups. I'm an advisor, I'm a mentor, I'm an investor, and I get to meet so many cool people that are doing interesting things. And I would not have that access had I not been here in San Francisco. And then my just tale of caution, which I'll end with, is the valuation in 2000 of Netflix was about $50 million. You had Blockbuster, right, in the multi-billion-dollar revenue, and Reed Hastings, one of my favorite CEOs. If you guys know of him, the CEO of Netflix, but really admirable person. He flew out to Blockbuster at the $50 million valuation to see if Blockbuster would sell. And the CEO of Blockbuster at the time said, "It's a small idea." Remember how I talked to you guys about the chasm? He said, "It's a small idea. We're not interested in it." Literally within 10, 20 years, you can see the meteoric rise of Netflix. So just 20 years ago. So, think about back when, it was 2010. Think about where you were. That time plus another time ago, you had CEOs of major retail companies saying, "I'm not interested in digital distribution." So just for me, it's like, wow, think about what could happen in just 10 years. And you guys are so lucky because that's going to be your career, right? So I'm excited for you all as you build your careers. Beth, did you want me to speak to this, or I'm sure you can do it much more justice than I?
Sure, I can. Thank you. So we just wanted to give a little plug and let you all know that our rotational management program application opened yesterday. So if you are interested in pursuing a career in retail at Gap Inc., and what we're really looking for.
I love Claire. I love a Claire cameo.
Let's just embrace it.
Yeah.
We're really looking for our future leaders for our company and industry. So it's a very rigorous leadership development program, but you can find more information on our website. And I'm also going to drop my email in the chat if you would like to chat a little bit more or learn a little bit more information about the program. So please feel free to reach out. Would love to answer any questions that you might have. And also, yes, it's so exciting.
I know, Claire's in 2040.
There you go, yes. Something else to just share is this is one opportunity that we're recruiting for in the fall, but please continue to check out our career site as I know that there a lot has gone on in COVID, but we are slowly beginning to start rehiring at Gap Inc. across the board. And one thing just interestingly to note, so like Brianna talked a lot about the cool new like technological strategies and what she's looking at about thinking high level, like how can we be pushing our business forward? One fun fact is that we actually have more employees in our tech and digital roles than we do in product functions. So we actually are, if you think about it, a technology company. We have a lot of internal data scientists, software engineers who help us bring our, push our business forward, bring it to life, and create a lot of proprietary information. So please continue to take a look at that. And you can also reach out to me and I can do my best to try to connect you with applicable stakeholders for future careers. So there's our plug. And Brianna, anything else you want to share before we have a couple questions that came through, and I think we have time for one. So I'll ask that and then.
Okay. I'm so bummed. I'm sorry, you guys. We don't have more time for questions. No, I just want to echo what Beth said, is that I think the next 20 years in retail is all going to be about the mesh of what I talked about today with product and tech. So really excited time to be in it. And then, you can see my name there. You're welcome to ping me on LinkedIn. Welcome to the industry, I guess is what I'd like to say.
Awesome, thank you. And just to close us out, Abigail Schaefer asked, so with this like huge jump in online shopping and like in May numbers in particular for Gap Inc., we saw a huge increase in apparel sales. And so what have we noticed about the shift, and have we done anything differently to address, so sorry everyone, to address COVID in particular and the change in our customer shopping pattern? Like what has Banana brands done differently?
Absolutely. And there are a couple of buckets, right? First is on our product. So unfortunately, Banana Republic's product mix was much more geared toward, work, outfitting people for the work that the world needs. Obviously, with the formal on top, less formal on the bottom, comfort and lounge being so important. Went back to the drawing board, and we did a lot of those methodologies I was talking to you about where's the customer, where are they going to be, and really retooled our product offering into something that better fit into people's lives. So we did that with, chasing into product with our vendors to get more product out that fit that requirement. We're actually going to be launching a few new categories that you'll see that fit into that bucket on the product side. On the accessibility and experience side, we had to really go to our e-commerce strategy, and we were saying internally at the time that's our only store right now. And we always say it's our main store, but it was our only store at that point. I mean, obviously I did the 10-point jump to 27% for the industry, but for apparel it was 4 or 5x that. So we had to go in, and you saw a lot of the solutions. We were talking a lot about easy, frictionless returns. We have been a huge focus on converting. As you can imagine from one of the data I showed you, we have a lot of customers that only shop at stores. So we did a huge effort to go out, email marketing, promotions, product, with those store-only customers to try and convert them right along that technology adoption curve to shop online. And we continue to be focused there.
Great, thank you.
Is that all?
Yeah, I think since we're at time, that's all, but I'll shoot you additional questions that come through. And again, everyone, I dropped my email address in the chat. Please feel free to reach out, whether it's about this session in particular or if any other random questions pop in your head. If I don't know the answer, I will find someone who does and connect you with them.
Yeah, Beth, I was just going to offer to, again, maybe I'm trying to give myself therapy 20 years ago, but if anyone has any questions about your career choices or the RMP program, or whether or not you like retail, just keep it, I hope you keep in mind, I'm literally on my 4th or 5th cat life. I was an English major, I worked on Capitol Hill, I was New York consultant. You can shape your career in many ways is my point. So if you have any angst or questions about that, I really enjoy answering those types of questions. So happy to be a resource.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us. Looking forward to seeing you in our next RISE session next week. Thanks, Brianna, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Have a good day. Have an almost happy Friday and a good weekend, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, Beth. Thanks to NRF for hosting this. This is awesome.
Thank you. All right, have a good one, everyone.